The last thing my daughter said before the line went quiet was 3 words, and they weren't directed at me. She was talking to him. Please, just stop. I heard something break. Glass, maybe a plate. Then the call went dead. I was sitting in my kitchen in Sudbury when that call came through. November late, and the cold had already settled into the walls the way it does up here. That particular Ontario cold that doesn't announce itself, just arrives and stays. I had a mug of tea going cold on the counter and the hockey game on low in the other room. I remember those details because the mind holds on to ordinary things right before the world changes. I'm Gordon Hale, 67 years old, retired, widower. I live alone in the house where my daughter grew up, same house my wife Miriam and I bought the year our daughter was born. Most people in this part of Sudbury know me as the quiet man who walks his border collie along the lake trail every morning before 7. They see me at the Legion on Remembrance Day. They see me at the Tim Hortons on Elm Street every Tuesday reading The Northern Life. They see a retired man with a gray beard and a bad knee who takes his time crossing parking lots. That's all most people see. What they don't see, what I deliberately never brought up, never wore on my sleeve, never used to impress anyone at a dinner party, is that I spent 23 years with the RCMP, the last 11 of them in the emergency response team. ERT isn't the kind of work you boast about. It's the kind of work that teaches you to read a room the moment you enter it, to notice which exit is closest, to understand that real danger doesn't announce itself with noise. Real danger comes quietly and then very fast. I retired when my knee finally made the call for me. I put the gear away, moved the service photos into a box in the basement, and told myself I was done with all of that. Miriam was still alive then. She always said I left the job at the door too well. Said sometimes she wished I'd bring a little of it home, just the confidence part, the calm in a storm part. She had a way of saying things like that made me look at myself sideways. Cancer took her 4 years later. Pancreatic. 3 months between diagnosis and the end. There wasn't time to adjust to the idea of losing her before she was already gone. My daughter, Abigail, Abby, was 28 when her mother died. She handled it the way she handles most things, which is to say she went quiet inside and busy outside. A year later, she met a man named Shane Kowalski at a friend's wedding in Barrie. He was 35, broad-shouldered, worked in commercial real estate development, handsome in the way that makes people assume things about a person. He told good stories, laughed easily, picked up dinner tabs without being asked. Abby brought him up to Sudbury that Christmas, and I watched him work a room the way I'd seen other men work rooms over the years. I tried hard to like him. I wanted to like him. But old habits of observation don't retire when you do. The first thing I noticed was small. Christmas dinner. Abby had made tourtière from her grandmother's recipe, her mother's mother from Quebec. Old recipe card in faded pencil. She'd been making it since she was a teenager, and it was always good. Shane took one bite and said loudly, in front of everyone, "It's a bit dry this year, babe. Did you forget something?" And then he laughed like it was nothing. Abby laughed too. But she didn't quite meet anyone's eyes while she laughed, and her left hand, under the table, I was sitting beside her, tightened around her napkin without her seeming to know it. That reflex. The pre-flinch, we used to call it in training. Your body bracing for impact before the conscious mind has even registered the threat. I filed it away and said nothing. Over the following year, I watched carefully. Shane moved Abby down to Hamilton, his city, his turf, his circle of friends. When she called me, which became less frequent, there was a flatness in her voice that hadn't been there before. Not sadness exactly, more like muffled, like someone speaking from behind a closed door. At Victoria Day, they came up for the long weekend. Shane made a comment about Abby's route when she drove. "You always pick the slow way. It's like you're afraid of highways." At the Neighbors Canada Day gathering, he interrupted her story about a work trip with, "That's not exactly how it went, Ab." In front of 6 people, she stopped telling the story. Small cuts, constant, and always delivered with a smile, so there was never any moment clean enough to call out. One Saturday in September, Abby came up alone. Shane had a golf thing, and we went to the farmer's market together the way we used to when she was in high school. Walking back to the car, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Dad, do you ever think some people just bring out the worst in other people?" I looked at her. "Or bring out the worst in you specifically?" I asked. She didn't answer. She looked at a display of late-season sunflowers and said, "I'm probably just tired." That evening, after she left, I went down to the basement. I don't go down there often. It's where the boxes are. Miriam's things, some of my old service files, equipment I kept when I had no reason to keep it and didn't know what else to do with it. I sat in the old camp chair and I thought for a long time. Before Abby left for university, I taught her something. I framed it as a game, the way you do with teenagers who roll their eyes at anything that sounds like a safety lecture. We set up a simple phrase system. Nothing elaborate. I was trained in field communication, not spy novels. If she ever found herself in a situation where she couldn't speak freely, couldn't openly ask for help, she could send me a specific text, something that would pass as ordinary in someone else's hands. We chose it together, sitting at this same kitchen table. "Can you check if you still have Mom's old chili recipe? The one with the kidney beans." Her mother had never made chili with kidney beans in her life. Abby knew that. I knew that. No one else would know that. I told her, "If you ever send that text for real, I come. No questions, no delays, I come." She was 19. She said, "Dad, you're so dramatic." I said, "Probably." I locked the system away in the back of my mind and mostly forgot about it for 8 years. That November night, I was still sitting with my cold tea when my phone lit up on the counter. "Hey Dad, do you still have Mom's chili recipe? The one with the kidney beans?" Shane's been asking me to make it. I read it twice, very slowly. Then the world I'd built around ordinary life. The Tuesday coffees, the morning walks, the hockey games on low. All of it folded away in about 2 seconds, and something else came forward. Something I had not used in 7 years, but which apparently had not gone anywhere. I stood up, got my coat, checked that my phone was charged. I called 911 on the way out of the driveway. The dispatcher was calm and professional, the way they are trained to be. I told her, "Possible domestic disturbance in progress. Female potentially injured. Male subject may be intoxicated." I gave the Hamilton address, the one Abby had stopped calling home in her voice, even when she called it home in words. "Sir, can you tell me your relationship to the resident?" "Her father," I said. "Are you currently en route to the address?" "Yes. Please wait for officers to respond before approaching the residence." I told her I understood. I didn't tell her what I actually intended to do. That didn't seem like a productive conversation. It's 2.5 hours from Sudbury to Hamilton on a clear day. That night it was snowing. The highway through Perry sounds slick and dark, the kind of driving that takes your whole attention. I drove steadily. Not fast enough to lose control of anything, including myself. The radio stayed off. I needed to think clearly, and noise doesn't help with that. Here's something they don't tell you in films about men in my line of former work. We are not wired to enjoy these moments. The opposite. 23 years of training taught me one thing above everything else. The goal is always to de-escalate. The goal is always to bring someone home. Violence is the failure mode. You use it only when every other option is gone, and you use only exactly as much as necessary, and then you stop. What I felt driving south through the snow was not anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger is indulgent. Anger costs you judgment. What I felt was the same thing I used to feel during the most serious calls, a cold, precise narrowing. Everything irrelevant fell away. The bad knee, the cold, the hour. What remained was one single task. Get to my daughter. I know the Hamilton Street. Abby had shown me the house over video call when they'd first moved in. Semi-detached, older neighborhood, front room porch with a broken railing she'd mentioned. Shane kept promising to fix. The lights were on when I pulled up, every ground floor window lit. I could hear raised voices before I even got out of the truck. His voice. I crossed the front yard. Snow muffled everything except him. Through the front window, I could see the living room was a mess. Something knocked off the shelf, cushions on the floor. I moved toward the side gate into the backyard. It opened without noise. The kitchen door at the back was not latched all the way. Inside, I could hear clearly now. Shane was shouting at a volume that was past anger. past the part of anger that communicates anything, and into the part that's only about power, about making someone small enough to control. Abby was crying, not loudly. The quiet kind of crying that happens when someone has been afraid for a long time, and fear is the only thing left that still makes sense. I heard something strike the counter, not a hit, an object being slammed down. But close enough. I came through the kitchen door. Shane had his back to me. He was leaning over Abby where she'd backed herself against the refrigerator, both of his hands braced on either side of her. Fate. She saw me first. Her face did something complicated. Relief because she understood, even then, that what came next was unpredictable. I said calmly, "Step away from her." Shane spun around. He was drunk. You could see it in the way he recalibrated his balance when he turned. His eyes took a moment to find me. Then he laughed. "Oh," he said, "Superdad drove all the way from Sudbury." I said it again. "Step away from my daughter. Or what?" He spread his hands wide. "What exactly are you going to do, Gord? Call the cops? They're probably already on their way." He smirked. "You can't do anything." He took 2 steps toward me. This is the part people are always curious about. They imagine it's complicated. It isn't. 23 years of ERT training doesn't make you want to fight. It makes you efficient at stopping one when there is no other option. The moment Shane's weight shifted forward, I stepped to his outside, redirected the arm he didn't even know he was throwing yet, rotated behind him, and brought him face down onto the kitchen floor in a single controlled movement. He hit hard enough to knock the breath out of him. I put one knee into the center of his back and held his right arm at a precise angle. Not enough to cause injury. Enough to communicate with complete clarity that he was finished. "What the? Let go of me." "Stop moving," I said. He bucked once instinctively. I applied a small amount of additional pressure. He went still with a sharp intake of breath. Pain compliance. Controlled, precise, minimal. An old vocabulary. Abby stood with her hands over her mouth. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, not serious but bleeding, and her forearm had red marks where something, or someone, had grabbed her hard. Somewhere outside, I could see red and blue light beginning to color the kitchen walls. 2 Hamilton officers came through the front door in under a minute. I called out clearly before they reached the kitchen. "Gordon Hale, retired RCMP. Subject is restrained, prone, no weapons on him. Victim is my daughter. She's injured. She's safe." They came around the corner with hands on their holsters. One of them was young. The other was maybe 45 and had the look of a person who processes scenes fast. He looked at how Shane was positioned. He looked at my posture. Something moved across his face. "Sir, can you rise slowly and move back toward the wall?" I did exactly that. The younger officer cuffed Shane while he was still trying to understand what had happened to him. Shane started in immediately. "He assaulted me. He broke into my house. I'm the one who—" Nobody in that room was listening to Shane. The senior officer guided me gently to the side of the kitchen. In a low voice, he asked, "You said retired RCMP?" 23 years, I said. ERT for 11. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You handle yourself like it." Abby was sitting on the kitchen floor by then, her back against the cabinet, knees pulled up, the EMT crouching in front of her. She looked simultaneously younger and older than her age. She had her mother's eyes. I have always seen her mother's eyes in her. And in that moment, they were exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I sat down on the floor beside her, which takes more effort at 67 than it once did. She leaned against my shoulder without saying anything. That nearly undid me. Because I am a man who spent 11 years kicking down doors in body armor, who has seen things I don't describe to people who didn't need to know. And the thing that nearly broke me was my daughter leaning against my shoulder on a kitchen floor in Hamilton in November. The strange stillness of a house after violence doesn't feel like peace. It's heavier than that. It's the silence of everything that was said and everything that wasn't said, settling into the walls all at once. Abby came back to Sudbury with me that night. We drove through the dark, mostly without speaking. The snow had eased. At some point past Perry Sound, she fell asleep with her head against the window, and I drove carefully for 2 hours in the quiet. She slept in her old room. Same iron bed frame, Same quilt Miriam sewed during one long January when the lake was frozen solid, and she'd taken up quilting because she said she needed something slow. I hadn't changed much in there. Some things you leave the way they are because you're not ready to decide what they mean. In the morning, I made coffee before the sun came up. My border collie, Fen, lay across the heat vent near the back door. Outside, 6 inches of fresh snow on the yard, and the lake just barely visible through the trees, pale gray in the early light. Abby came downstairs in an old university sweatshirt. Her eyebrow had a small bandage on it. She poured herself coffee and stood at the window for a moment before she spoke. "I should have left a year ago," she said. I thought about that before answering. "Probably." She turned around. I think she expected something softer. "But she knows me." "Why didn't you?" I asked. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Because I thought I could fix it. And then I thought it was my fault it wasn't fixed. And then I stopped knowing what normal felt like." I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. She looked down into her coffee. "I didn't want to call you." "Why not?" Her voice went smaller. "Because you never fell apart after Mom died. You just kept going. I didn't want you to think I was weak." I sat with that sentence for a long time. The truth is, I didn't keep going because I was strong. I kept going because stillness terrified me after Miriam died. Grief, when you've spent a career controlling your responses, starts to feel like a malfunction. So I controlled it, which meant I also controlled my presence, my availability, my warmth. Abby was 28 and heartbroken and needed her father, and her father was there physically while being somewhere else entirely. Children know the difference, even adult ones. "You're not weak," I said. "You were afraid." "Those aren't the same thing," she cried then, quietly into her coffee. I didn't say anything more for a while. Sometimes saying nothing is the correct response. Later that week, a detective from the Hamilton police called. Her name was Detective Arsenault. Methodical, thorough, no wasted words. She told us they'd found text messages on Shane's phone, months of them, that documented a pattern of control and intimidation. Medical records from an urgent care visit Abby had made 7 months earlier, a sprained wrist she had attributed to a fall. Abby, it turned out, had also been keeping records of her own. She'd been emailing herself summaries of incidents, dates, details, what was said, what happened, for almost a year. She'd never mentioned it to anyone. When she told me, I stared at her for a moment. "Where did you learn to do that?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. "I grew up watching you," she said. "You always said document everything." There are moments in fatherhood that arrive without warning and hit you somewhere you weren't prepared to defend. That was one of them. The legal process took several months. Hearings, evidence disclosure. The particular grinding pace of Ontario Family Court crossed with criminal proceedings. Shane hired a lawyer who was expensive and aggressive, and who tried, in the preliminary hearing, to suggest that my involvement that night constituted unlawful entry and excessive force. The body camera footage from the responding officers made short work of that argument. I appeared at the sentencing hearing. I had not planned to wear my dress uniform. I kept it in the basement, same garment bag it's been in, since my retirement ceremony in Barrie, and I had genuinely not opened it in years. But the night before the hearing, I went downstairs and took it out. I don't know entirely why. Maybe because Miriam used to say it made me look like someone who'd actually earned something. Maybe because I wanted Shane to understand, clearly and finally, what kind of man he'd spent 2 years dismissing at dinner tables. Maybe I just needed to remind myself. When I walked into the courtroom that morning, Abby looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since she was about 12. Something between awe and reassurance. Like she was seeing a version of me she'd only heard about secondhand. Shane, for his part, looked at me from across the room and went very still. The prosecutor asked if I wished to address the court. I stood up, slowly. The knee makes everything slower now, which I've accepted, and I said the following, more or less. I spent 2 decades responding to the worst situations families find themselves in. I've seen what happens when violence is treated as a private matter. I've seen what happens when people stay silent out of shame, and when systems treat victims as inconveniences. I am not here today asking for revenge. I am asking for accountability, not for my benefit, for my daughters, and for anyone else in a situation like hers who is watching to see whether the outcome is worth the risk of speaking up. I sat back down. Abby took my hand. Shane received 18 months to be served in a provincial facility in Burlington, along with mandatory counseling, a 3-year probation period, and a no-contact order. His lawyer noted for the record that his client expressed remorse. I said nothing. Remorse at that point was Shane's problem to work through. Winter broke slowly, the way it does in northern Ontario. March is still winter here, and April hedges its bets. By the time things began to genuinely thaw, Abby had found a small apartment on a quiet street near Flour Mill, back in Sudbury. Second floor of an older house, good natural light, a landlord who was 73 and mostly left her alone, and occasionally left cabbage rolls outside her door with a note that said made too many. She started working again. She'd taken a leave from her HR position in Hamilton and found a similar role in Sudbury, remote mostly, which helped. The first few weeks she was home, she didn't sleep well and didn't eat much and jumped at sounds that didn't need jumping at. I didn't press her. I have seen enough trauma responses in my career to understand that recovery moves on its own schedule and cannot be rushed by good intentions. Some Sunday mornings she'd drive over and we'd walk the lake trail together with Fen. We didn't always talk much. Sometimes she'd tell me something that had happened during the week, or something she was thinking about. I listened and didn't offer solutions unless she asked for them directly. That took me longer to learn than I'd like to admit. One morning in late April, she said, "I still feel embarrassed sometimes." I asked her what about, that I stayed so long, that I believed him when he said I was the problem, that I didn't see it. I stopped walking. "You saw it," I said. "You documented it. You planned. You sent me the signal. You were the one who kept your head when it mattered. That's not weakness." She looked out at the lake. "I think I needed someone to tell me it was real," she said quietly. That I wasn't making it up or overreacting or being too sensitive, like he always said. "It was real," I said. "It was always real." Fen found a stick and dropped it at my feet. We kept walking. A month or so later, my daughter brought my granddaughter over for dinner. Her name is Isla. She's 8. And she belongs to my daughter's best friend, also named Abby, oddly, which has always caused confusion. And she'd been staying with my daughter for a weekend, while her parents were in Calgary for a family thing. Isla had decided she and my Abby were best friends, which I found entirely credible, because my daughter has always been easy to love. That afternoon, Isla followed me around the kitchen while I made stew and asked me questions about Fen, about the lake, about whether the ice on the lake was the same ice every year or different ice, and then, completely out of sequence, about what I used to do before I retired. "I worked for the police," I said. "Did you catch people?" "Sometimes." She thought about that. "Did you ever get scared?" I stirred the stew. "All the time." She looked genuinely shocked, the way only an 8-year-old can look. "But you're a grown-up. Grown-ups get scared too," I said. "What matters is what you do while you're scared." She climbed up onto the stool at the kitchen counter and considered this with great seriousness. "My mom says brave means scared, but you do it anyway." "Your mom is right," I said. Later, after dinner, Abby and I sat on the back porch with tea, while Isla and Fen ran circles in the yard in the last of the April light. The snow was finally, genuinely gone. The birch trees at the edge of the property were showing new green. The lake was doing that particular thing it does in spring, when the angle of the light makes it look like hammered tin. Abby wrapped both hands around her mug and was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I keep thinking about the chili recipe." I looked at her. "I almost didn't send it," she said. "I kept telling myself it wasn't serious enough yet, that I was overreacting, that if I sent it and you came and it wasn't actually that bad, I'd feel stupid." I set my tea down. "I'm glad you sent it," I said. She looked down at her mug. "What if I hadn't?" I didn't answer that. Some questions don't need an answer. They need to be heard and then set down. "The code worked the way it was supposed to," I said. "You did what you were supposed to do, and now you're here." She was quiet for a moment. "I should have used it sooner. Maybe. You're not going to tell me it's okay that I waited? No, I said. But I understand why you did, and you used it when you needed to. That matters. Isla came running onto the porch to show Abby a very ordinary stick she seemed to consider significant. The moment passed into the everyday, which is where the important moments usually end up. I've spent a lot of evenings on that porch since then. Fen asleep near my feet, the lake catching whatever light is left in the sky, the house making its old sounds. It's quieter than it used to be, and I've made my peace with that, more or less. Miriam would have a lot to say about the state of the garden. I've let things go that she kept. Some things I kept that surprised me. What I didn't expect, in this last chapter of a life I thought I mostly had figured out, was to understand something new about why I did the work I did. I used to think I joined the RCMP because I believed in law and structure and order, and I did. But sitting on that porch on April evenings with tea going cold, watching my daughter begin to reclaim herself week by week, I think the real reason was simpler. Some people, without training or instinct or circumstance on their side, have no one to call. No code word, no father who drives through a snowstorm. They face what Abby faced alone, and they survive it or they don't. And no one outside those walls ever knows. I was able to answer the phone when my daughter needed me. That was the thing I was trained for, all along. If someone in your life has ever needed help finding the words to ask for it, or if you have ever been the persons on the other end of a call like that one, you already understand what I mean. And if you haven't, I hope you'll do one thing. Tell the people you love that if they ever need you, truly need you, there's no call too late, no distance too far, no hour too unreasonable. Make sure they know the door is open. Because sometimes that knowledge is the only thing that gives someone the courage to reach for the phone.